And we start doing a lot of the bots, technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and applying to advertising, and as well as other areas like healthcare and so on. So thank you for the opportunity here to share with all of you.
Hi, I'm Ben Royce. I'm on the business development team. I'm a global agency for Google, focusing mostly on performance and data. So one of the things that, since the beginning of machine learning showing up in the industry, I've been sort of obsessed with it a little bit. I think it's going to transform a lot of the way that we do our work and how the performance of it comes out in a much better way than originally. I'm also a lecturer at Columbia University, and Google's focus on machine learning is a large part of my job, talking about it and understanding how it's going to affect advertising and change the way that we interact with consumers.
Hi, I'm Adrian Cutler. I'm the global agency lead for Dentsu Aegis in Microsoft Search Advertising, Bing. For me, I feel really passionate about this topic and really excited to be here, thank you. Because when I look at this and I think about bots really truly are the modern day app. And for brands that get it right, you can actually have a really smart way of engaging with your customers.
Brilliant, thanks Adrian. And maybe before we start off, I think it might be worth agreeing a common language when we talk about all of this, because we, for instance, our panel today is called Brands, Bots, AI. We could also include voice in that, digital assistants. But essentially we're talking about one ecosystem that includes all of this, and it seems to me we're on the verge of turning over our entire digital lives to an intelligent agent that's going to sit in our pocket, or it's going to sit in our device in our homes, or sit in our device in our cars, or sit anywhere on any Internet of Things device. And it's the digital assistant, if you like, that's orchestrating that whole environment. But the bots then are what provide services to the digital assistant that allow the digital assistant to do its job. So, I don't know, I'm looking for cheap flights to Cannes, and the digital assistant calls up the bot and gets that information for me. But we're talking about that one overall ecosystem, so talking about all those interchangeably. But I think maybe one of the first things let's talk about is just the extent to which this has grown literally in the last 6 to 12 months. And we've some statistics here. Sorry. There we go. We've some statistics here that we talked about recently about how we now have approximately 500 million users of using a digital assistant of some kind, and that's expected to grow to 1.8 billion by 2021, which is pretty phenomenal. I might start with you, Ben. Why now, and why are we seeing this sort of explosive growth?
Yeah, when it comes to the voice-based technologies, there's been a ton of growth in the space, but the features aren't really that new, especially in the voice search area. So voice search has been a thing for Google for years now, but we've seen a lot of interest in this space, specifically because the accuracy of being able to transcribe voice to text is well above, in the high 90% in terms of getting it right and getting the right word at the right time when it being said, and the speed of it. And that's entirely thanks to machine learning and the neural networks that come with that. So what that means is that these machine learning can listen, transcribe faster, predict what you're going to say with more accuracy, therefore transcribe it better and faster. So as the features and the accuracy of those features improved, all of a sudden there was a lot more interest in voice, and the usefulness of voice became a lot more available to different types of products and services. And it doesn't have to be a voice response. It could be other services like chatbots or anything like that, as long as it involves voice. So the machine learning behind the technology is really what fueled the rise of that growth.
And what I think is interesting to see as well, we saw some more statistics that talked about how it's not just millennials, how we're seeing growth in voice across all different age groups, as well. And that, I guess, points to the accuracy and the ease of usage, and nothing to really install, just talk to your device and off you go. It's interesting as well how it's changing consumer behavior. So when we talk about digital assistants and we talk about the space, we're talking effectively to move to voice. And we're seeing some interesting trends. And I know, Adrian, we did some research with you guys in terms of what are some of the things that we're seeing when we talk about a move to voice. Do you want to talk us through some of those?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I mean, we look at the 2020 stat. Some of our joint research, we found out that we believe that by 2020, 50% of all queries are going to be done by voice, which is incredible. I mean, it's a massive stat. And then when you start to understand the layer down of the intent behind those specific queries, and for me, I found it quite surprising that actually, as you can see, the how and the what made up the largest volume of that query. It's not just the where, which is what you might expect from a voice-related query. And actually what you can then do is you can understand the sort of natural conversion intent of somebody from those keyword terms. So somebody that is searching for like a who or what is more top of funnel, whereas the people that are like, well, I want it, right now, so where do I go and get this? How do I go and get this? We see that there's a lot more direct consumer intent in the traditional way that we would expect from a purchase funnel, which is fascinating. So our research really dug deeper into this. And then also what was quite surprising is the query length.
Yeah, as well.
Yeah, exactly. That we're able to see that the voice query length is so much longer. So it really makes you start to think as a marketer, how do I really capitalize on that? And it's not just about the very short form traditional query strings that we'd expect to be able to really get the full effect from capitalizing on that intent, which is amazing. And then also from our research, we saw that when you look at the local queries, that it really is 3 times more likely to be local, which is, on the move, people are talking to their personal digital assistants, whichever one they're using. And, to be able to have something that was really relevant to the local surroundings at that point in time, and is really relevant to your intent, is phenomenal.
And what should marketers do, knowing these changes? What should marketers do?
Yeah. Well, for a start, work with an agency that is already looking at this is just like a given. I think that what's really important to note is brands and marketers do need to jump on the now. This isn't something that is tomorrow. This is today. This is starting right now. There are queries happening right now, so they can absolutely start to think about the generic intent of consumers and be able to go after them and capitalize on those keyword volumes that you see.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Adrian. And so we're talking about voice, but obviously voice isn't voice isn't always the most appropriate way to communicate with my digital device, right? So different contexts might require different ways of communicating with a digital assistant. So if we think about voice, text, how can brands start to understand when I should be thinking about utilizing one or the other? Can I put that to you, Asher, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at this point it's also good to separate out what we mean here when we're talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning. One good way to do this is to split the idea of cognition versus recognition. So, for example, with these two gentlemen we're talking about, pardon me, with these two gentlemen, I can do this. With these two folks we're talking, so what these folks were talking about was largely a split between being able to recognize and understand a topic. So that's, for example, voice recognition, but the back end doesn't actually understand that. There's no cognition there. It's just translating the query into text and passing it along into an existing system. Versus understanding, and those are products that, like say IBM's Watson, where there's some understanding of the concepts that are being presented, and then a degree of processing that brings back an answer. So pretty critical for us to be able to understand and then distinguish between the two. From a business standpoint, to answer the other end of the question, so from the business standpoint, I think shortening as much of the distance between the individual and what it is that they're trying to accomplish is the most successful angle. So for example, if you're going to create something that's going to exist in a chat environment, not attempting to move your existing application and build something by parity within messaging, but rather identifying what lends itself to that conversational environment, be it through recognition and understanding and then passing back to an existing system, or through cognition, where you're identifying an overall idea and having the back-end process it. So I think thinking about what your expectations are on the front end between the two, as well as what experience you're building and if it's germane to the context, are probably two of the biggest questions you want to answer before engaging in that space.
you mentioned to me, Ashok, previously as well, that you'd seen some good examples of brands who, who are actually recognising the difference between voice and text and trying to capitalise on that.
Absolutely. So one of the better examples that we've seen actually came out of the Philippines. Globe Telecom, which is one of the largest cellular providers down in the Philippines, recently created what they're referring to as a hybrid bot experience, which is essentially partially cognitive and partially human. So they have a small call center of folks that are responding, but they've also created a pretty fascinating and intricate artificial intelligence front end that's able to manage everything from things like billing inquiries all the way up to upsell, so adding a line or purchasing a new device, things of that nature. What's fascinating about what they've built, though, is they follow what they call service through empathy. So, or rather than I reverse that, pardon me, empathy through service, where essentially they're trying to, they're identifying the fact that most customers are seeking a simple resolution and they don't want to have discourse with an automated system. They just want that automated system to process their request quickly. So their rule of thumb is, if I can rapidly address somebody's desire, whether it's a challenge with billing or an opportunity to upsell through artificial intelligence faster than I can with a person, I'll divert them there. If the person is busy and I can do it through automation, I'll divert them there. And in doing so, they really are shortening that distance between the individual and the thing that they're seeking, rather than trying to build for the environment and making something conversational just for the sake of conversation.
I think that's a really great example. And I know, Alex, at Baidu, you guys have spent a lot of time working in this area, and you actually last year released a bot, your own bot, that is called Melody, a medical bot. Would you maybe tell us a little bit about Melody, so the context, what problem Melody is trying to solve, and maybe if you wouldn't mind also maybe some of the challenges and some of the things you've learned on that journey as you built Melody?
Sure, yes, thank you. So we've spent a lot of time in the last 2-3 years building different kind of bots. And we do it together with our customers and to improve the customer service experience. And we do it both through text and also through voice. So those are two great areas of engagement.
What we're also doing is start launching this Melody platform, which is trying to help our internet users to better understand their healthcare issues and the questions that they have. In China, there are a lot of, unlike other parts of the world, and sometimes, like say for example in California, you can call in the after hours urgent care if your kids are sick or come down with some rash that you are concerned about. So parents have a very simple access to information. They just call a number and can get access to this information. But in China, many cities they don't. So when they are panicked, they are worried, parents, and how they need more help with that. So we come up with this Melody and can do a Q&A and to help them identify the problems and give them suggestions and guide them appropriately to the right facilities to go to. So give them some general information behind. So that's the genesis of the idea behind for the Melody bot. Yeah. But we run into a lot of challenges. It's still a work in progress, and still have a long way to go to really solve the problem. And this is only the beginning. And some of the challenges is that we find that people will, many parents or internet users in general, they'll come with different expectation of what they will get, and they may be asking a wide array of questions, and they might be getting what they are expecting to hear back. So, the first thing that we did very early on in the project is to narrow it down. So they say, oh, let's focus on parents, moms, dads, with young kids, let's say 6 years old and below. And we're trying to complete that scenario with all the different kind of symptoms and problems issues that they face, and try to narrow it down and deliver a very good user experience with that. And also one of the things we learned is that some of the interactions, when it gets too long, is hard to guide. So we need to add some of the steps or give multiple choice to sort of guide it along, so that within not more than 5 steps, preferably maybe within 3, you can get to somewhere that they feel like, I've been helped. Thank you very much. I think I have what I need. And the next step could be to call this number, or to make this appointment, or to take some action.
So from your perspective, Melody is something that's always being evolved as you learn more, and you're consistently changing it to improve.
Yes, it will. Yeah, I think as Aston, and he was talking about, as a cognitive aspect to it, and that part continues to be built up. we are experimenting with different approaches to this. We are building a large a knowledge graph, if you will, of information and rules that helps guide this information. At the same time, we are experimenting with a deep learning neural net kind of learning as you go approach as well. So at this point, I think most of the accuracy, accuracy is very, very important. We can't afford to give a wrong answer, or if you are uncertain about certain things, it's better to be upfront about it, rather than to give something that says, I think it's this, but then it's not, right? So I think in the long term, I think the machine learning, the reinforced learning is going to get better and better, but we're not quite there yet. But it's an important direction that we're exploring both approaches.
If I may, I think you touch on two really critical points, which is, so first of all, this, in my mind, is one of the best examples of the kind of experience that lends itself to chat. This is a conversational environment, it's consultative, and we can certainly think about, I'm sure, many parallels in the business world, whether we're talking about automotive or about luxury or what have you, where a consultative approach is critical. So, and this would not work as well, I would argue, in an app format, whereas other experiences might. So this is a great example just of what might work in the context. The other thing that I think is critical, and you touched on, is one of the significant advantages for developing in this space is that building an evergreen presence that can evolve over time. So in other words, updates can happen on the back end. You don't have to push them to your customers.
Yeah,
so as these experiences continue to get richer and richer and richer, the customer is just interacting with the same point of entry. They don't have to upload their app. They don't have to update an operating system. So it makes it a lot easier for all of the things that we're used to in advertising in terms of re-engagement, et cetera, without all of the extra challenges that have come from an app ecosystem. So a lot of really exciting stuff here.
Yeah, great point, Asher. And obviously at Google, we're doing lots of work in this space as well. So a lot of work, excuse me, and artificial intelligence and machine learning. Do you want to share, Ben, maybe some of the things that you guys have been working on and some of the results you've seen?
Basically, I think there's a lot of confusion around AI and machine learning. And one of the simple things that it doesn't always have to be a brand new experience for consumers. Sometimes you can just do the same thing, just much better, right? And that's an important distinction. So one of the examples that we always use is that when we applied machine learning to our own data centers, we were able to reduce the amount of energy we used, but not just from how much electricity or energy was used. We actually took into account the cost of maintenance. So if you have to turn on the air conditioners on and on and on and off and on, back and forth, you actually do a lot of damage that isn't an energy cost, it's a replacement cost. We built, using machine learning, we're actually able to optimize for energy cost and maintenance at the same time and reduce our energy usage significantly with no real change to, if you worked in, on those servers, you wouldn't notice a change. Like you said, it's like an update on the back end, it's just more efficient. And that's because we were able to be more accurate thanks to machine learning. So it doesn't always have to be a consumer-facing experience. Sometimes we just do the same thing better. So if it's utility-based, for example, on the advertising side, if you're a retailer or a type of client that has something that is incredibly utility or an informational need for a consumer, this kind of technology is great for you because, one, you can provide that utility instead of just answering the question, you can perform the task, right? And that's like where the combination of AI and chat and perhaps voice even comes together.
Yeah, great. And just let's move on to talk about brands and talk more about, let's say, from a marketer's perspective, what do we think the future is for brands in this space, in terms of marketing to consumers? And what are some of the things that brands need to think about? Asher, can I ask you to take that one?
Sure. So I think when brands look at this space, split into two thoughts. The first is what not to do. I think what we've learned over the last year and change, and there's certainly parallels to this in the past, is that people set themselves up for failure when they build for the technology and not for the problem, which is true of essentially any form of new media. But I'm sure all of us have been in a room, or I know I'm certainly guilty of it myself, where we say, oh, there's a new technology, what should we do to take advantage of it? As opposed to saying, well, within the context of our strategy and within our objectives as a business, does this medium more effectively meet that need versus other pre-existing channels? In many cases, media that exists today and have been around for a long time may be more effective than leveraging some of these new technologies, or not. So identifying the question or identifying the opportunity and aligning it back to your business, step one. Step two, when we think about what this means for businesses more broadly, comes around as this idea of brand as service. And as we look to how brand presence is evolving in this new landscape, we're getting to a place where the product that you provide, so the physical product, and I'm going to pick industries, let's say credit, for example, where the product itself is a commodity. More and more and more, I think brands are going to have to lean on the service aspect associated with that commodity, as opposed to the emotional side of a brand that we're all used to building as marketers. So a good example of this, for example, would be American Express. Amex dove into building bots pretty quickly on our platform about a year and change ago. And one of the things that they identified was that people invest in American Express cards because the service component, that concierge that you get at the higher level of the cards, had a lot of value for them. But like the physical, but the credit itself, is something that you can get essentially on the open market. So what they did was they split out the feature set of what was available in their app. So their app still was providing you all of the data that you want from your credit card, payments, being able to hear about and being able to shut down your card, et cetera, all of those things. But then they took the element that's much more conversational and much more unique to them as a brand, which is their concierge service, and they put that into a bot environment, which makes a ton of sense because it's a good example of identifying the channel that's appropriate for the experience and also capitalizing and representing your brand through what makes it unique versus simply presenting an emotional component to it. So as a result, people using the American Express bot are able to take advantage of booking restaurants, finding recommendations for event spaces, getting tickets, all the things that are sort of the higher level brand components of American Express versus the more transactional nature, which lends itself to a pre-existing and perfectly effective channel.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know you said to me when we last spoke as well that your advice was that if you have to think about what bot should I build, you're probably already on the wrong road, that you're thinking of the technology first. And just on that though, Alex, having built bots at Baidu, what advice would you give to a brand that's building its first bot? What would you say to a brand?
Yes. So Baidu as a search engine, we answer people's questions all the time. So what we see is that in the Chinese consumer, in the mobile era, the consumers are spending hours and hours chatting with people and businesses all the time. So they are very used to conversational as means to access information. So I think for brand, I think it's very natural that they can embrace and meet the consumer on the mobile era in the same fashion. So when they have certain questions about a certain brand, it would be great to be there to answer their questions. And they want answers quick. And that's the millennials. And I think more than half the internet population in China are millennials now, and then they want the answers right away, and they want to be able to ask questions. So we are finding more and more helping our brand advertisers to have their chat button available. Of course, today some of these chats behind they are mostly powered by very great customer service. But as you can see, we can build bots that learn from great customer service reps. And some questions are good; we can see them talk longer. Some response is not that great, and then you will say, oh, this is a good rep, I learned from this guy. And it is not a good answer, right? So we actually can fine-tune in those areas and to learn to be able to respond better. And these are technologies we're getting easier and easier and to be available as a platform to help brand advertisers to embrace and meet the consumers in the mobile era.
Thanks for that, Alex. And let's move back to voice, because I know I just want to pick up on something that you said a while ago, Adrian, and you talked about, the growth of voice, the sheer growth of voice in terms of queries. And I think the question has to be asked, what does that mean for revenue? Because clearly, obviously, there's a lot of revenue comes at the moment from search in its current forms. So if we look that we're moving to a world of voice, what does that mean for a monetization of that area? We're going to see some monetization in this area, do you think?
Cool. So the data shows that by 50% of voice queries are, 50% of queries are going to be voiced by 2020, which is fascinating. And I think all of us have a challenge to think about that model and to understand, how you can monetize in that space. Now, my personal view, not Microsoft's official line, but my personal view is, we've got to really think about this properly, because you're not about to have a personal digital assistant in any interactive form read out 10 ads. That's just not a good consumer experience. And actually, we have to think about how brands are going to be positioned in that consumer experience, and that they act very soon to be able to get into that space. Because if you think about it, if we look at lessons that we learned from the app world, so apps consumption is 2.2 to 2.8 million apps exist on the different platforms, of which 70% of the usage comes from only 200. So actually, if I'm ordering a pizza and I choose my particular app that is through that personal assistant, I've got my favorite, and that's what I'm going to use. And it's going to be really difficult for a different brand to come in with a different app that will try and segment me away from that. Because I think from a monetization perspective, my personal view is that I'm okay if my personal assistant gave me a really relevant, based on my past performance, based on the information I've shared with it, the security access that I've given it, for it to give a recommendation. Yeah. Now, I'm okay with that it would just give me one, and very specific one, that is really relevant to me. And to be really relevant to the time, so if I'm searching just like we would expect now, like during the day, and I'm asking my personal assistant to find me a place to have pizza, and it's during the day, maybe it's going to give me restaurants that are close by. Whereas if I'm at home and it's Friday night and I'm going to watch a movie with my wife, and I'm doing a similar query, I want it to be able to deliver pizza to me. Maybe I just eat too much pizza. But I think it's okay as long as it's about real relevancy and it's really in the moment. And then all of us need to think about how we would capitalise on that.
So I think it's fair to say that we're not really clear yet what the monetization would look like, but it certainly is going to be about a relevant experience for consumers.
I think it has to be, because also if you look at the other likening to like radio, would you really want an experience when you're interacting on a very personal level to suddenly have an ad that pop over the top? So we've really got to think about it carefully.
Yeah, brilliant. I'd like to just finish up by asking everybody the same question, if you wouldn't mind. So, clearly we're really at the beginnings of understanding how brands can interact in this environment with consumers. But we're not obviously going to sit back and wait for it to unfold and let's see what happens. So what advice would each of you give to brands today? What should you start doing right now to start capitalizing on this environment? Should we start with you, Asher, maybe?
Sure. So building off what you said, completely agree. We are seeing a shift. So if we look back about 15 years prior to Facebook, just adoption of digital media in general, we all remember contextual targeting. We've moved from contextual targeting to finding groups of like-minded people, and I think what we're going to see more and more of over the next few years is targeting individual people with specific opportunities. So exactly what you're mentioning. In order for that to work, and to be possible at scale, before everyone gets terrified of creating an individual ad unit for every single customer you have, is going to require pretty significant investment in your back end so that you can start to prepare the AI and machine learning that's going to be critical for you to deliver the experiences that you want in every channel you're in. Whether it's in a pre-existing channel like an app, whether it's in a new channel like these parts of the world like chat, having that logic on the back end is going to be utterly critical. So I think as you consider how you want to do this, I would say look to building the infrastructure first before you think about how you want to build your front end, which is awful tempting given how exciting the space is, but can sometimes lead to less success than if there's more thoughtful back end product built.
Brilliant. Alex, what would you offer to brands?
Yes. So I think I agree with you. I think it's the right time. I think it's a great platform to help bring more brand awareness and brand lift through a conversational bot framework. The thing to remember, I think number one is that the potential is enormous, but you must start small somewhere. You must focus on somewhere and deliver a very good user experience first off. So I think it's better to narrow the audience. This is the target demographic, and this is how I will explain to them and how you guide the conversation along. So that's number one. Be very, very specific, start small, and then grow from there. Yes. And the second point, I think, it's that as you engage, you have to set the expectation right. So in certain cases, even if you have the target demographics, but if you can ask any questions under the sun, you're not going to get a good user experience. So guiding the conversation is very, very critical to set the expectation. And if, let's say, things are very wide range of topics possible, it's better to just come out front and say,
I can help you with A, B, and C. Which one would you like to know more?
Yeah, right.
And that kind of guidance, I think, is very, very critical to get a very good user experience.
Yeah, excellent point. Ben?
I definitely agree with the premise that you have to have your data organized the right way with the answers first. That's like infrastructure. One of the things I've noticed, though, with working with other teams on voice-based assistants is they're working on the technology, they're trying to get the answer right, and then there's sort of a separate team that's disconnected that works on the personality or the persona. And this is actually absolutely fascinating, is that there are teams that are working on this, and they have brand pyramids. They have what's the tone of voice of our brand? What's the experience like? And then that is divorced from the voice-based assistant conversation sometimes, which is mind-boggling, because this is your literal chance to have a brand be embodied by a personality that talks. This is the pinnacle of what we've been working for to build personality of brands, and it's sort of been sometimes divorced from the conversation, or it's an afterthought, which I think you've got to have the right answers for the bot, but remember, this is literally how your brand will sound. Is it male? Is it female? Is it a little snarky? Is it kind of funny? Is it just very flat tone and very serious? Like, these are all decisions that you constantly make during creating advertising campaigns, but now you have the chance to actually build the thing that does all those in a short sentence or so. So I think the focus on understanding what is your brand's personality, not in a conceptual sense, in a literal sense. Is it going to be funny? Is it a male voice? Is it a female voice? That sort of thing.
And I think one of the things you mentioned previously when we spoke as well is, the value of a good copywriter, right?
Yes.
To do that, right?
Yeah. The copywriter has a huge opportunity in developing a personality, literally with a personal assistant.
Yeah,
so,
great
totally.
point. Adrian.
So for me, advice for brands. Well, I think about our Microsoft positioning is about democratizing AI. And I think this really resonates well with brands, or could resonate well with brands, because if we are really going to get every person to feel really comfortable with this infrastructure, for a start, it has to be a given that it works across multiple platforms. So whatever bot framework that's being developed on, it has to work on Facebook Messenger, it has to work in Slack, it has to work in Microsoft Teams. So you've got to be able to interact with it across multiple platforms. So that's a given. So you want to be able to using a framework that allows you to do that. And then also, if I think about the democratization, the way that you can really, truly land that is to make sure that the security is in place and that the consumer choice is there. So we have a choice of what we share with that bot or AI, that interaction, that personal digital assistance. And as long as brands are conceptually considering this from the start, I think we're going to see some exciting things from this space.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys, so much for your time. Thank you to Adrian, thank you to Ben, Alex, and Asher. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.